hey, it's Wes, and I'm recording in 24p so my fancy B-roll lines up. And today we have a little light with big power. It's the new Zhiyun Molus B500, and this sits at the top of a new line of 4 powerful new lights from Zhiyun. And the 500, as you might guess, stands for 500 watts. But not quite. We'll get to that. And why is this light exciting? Well, we're going to cut right to the chase here. It is the first light of this size where you have this much power and it's all integrated. There is no dirty dangler going on here. It's an AC power cord into here, all integrated, all small. Getting ahead of ourselves, we'll start with the build quality. Let's break this down a little bit. We have a stock reflector that looks much like a lot of stock reflectors. But as you can see, we have a light that is half the size of a lot of 150 or 200 watt lights. It's got some heft to it though, because there is a lot of heat sinking going on in here. If we crack this open a little bit to take a closer look, we can see we have a glass protective cover. And pretty much only the front faceplate and then the heat sink hanging in behind it is the metallic chassis. Everything else is a plastic. It's not like the most rigid plastic ever, but it has like some flexibility to it. So I feel like if you dropped this, it wouldn't chip or shatter, but still we are heavily reliant on some fancy plastic here. We have these kind of generic metal PC fan grills over the tops of these 2 fans. Then there's a fan in the back here as well for the power supply, because again, this is all integrated. And this flow in, out, up, down design, they call Dynavort cooling. There is no restricted flow chamber. It's just a ton of air coming in and out of this entire chassis. If we look on the bottom here, we have a metal part that kind of integrates to the front metal chassis that comes out here that latches onto our mounting arm, which is all metal. We have a plasticky handle grip here, but it's got a nice grippy rubber underneath. It feels really nice. Pops out, adjusts, very good, like that. Coming around to the side here, we have a USB-C that's mostly for remote control. We have our dimmer with shortcut button. We have our CCT control with shortcut button and our teeny tiny little screen on the top here. This is like the same screen that they put on all their tiny lights that cost significantly less. I'm a little disappointed with that. Now, it is clear that they do not intend for you to really operate this light by that screen. You can get a remote control that plugs in via USB-C, or you can use the app. I would still prefer to have a nicer screen on it. And back around to the bottom here, standard D connector for North American markets, and a nice hardware power switch. Love to have that, because then you can use it in studio mode or whatnot. Just plug it in and either control it from the AC or just switch it on and off quickly. I hate having to like fiddle or hold a button or something. On the front here, looking closer at the Bowens mount, this is all metal. It's all cast as a part of this front chassis, and underneath our LED protector, you can see we have a massive aluminum block heatsink, tons of thermal compound between the COB and the heatsink, and then our heat pipes coming in back. Obviously a very thorough thermal design, which is absolutely necessary for this tight construction. Coming around underneath again, we have our umbrella holder, which is plastic, but pretty thick, feels very rugged. Tiny little wheel for clamping down to the spigot. The knobs, they don't feel the most robust, but they do have protection shrouds on them, so they are fairly safe. And as you can very easily see, this is absolutely not weather sealed. And yes, there are weather sealed COB monolight LEDs on the market, such as from Aperture. And one of the key factors in that is that the power supply is a massive separate brick, whereas this one, it's all open to the weather. So I'm going to give the build quality on this an 8 out of 10. It has a lovely considered design, but a lot of plastic going on here. But the most important parts, the Bowens mount coming into the arm here, that is a big old chunk of metal. Moving on to feature set. Nothing revolutionary here. You can probably guess what we're looking at. The main 2 features here are loads of power and a tiny compact size that is easily travelable. Like, I can fit this in my camera backpack, let alone my lighting bag. It's going to be awkward, but it'll go in there. In actual practice, we're looking at about 475 watts of power. Maybe that's nitpicking, I don't know, but you might want to know that, at 5600K. Another feature is that hard power switch that lets you use it in studio mode. We have a Bowens mount, which, I mean, most of them do these days, and it's nice, it's tighty-righty to connect, which I consider as important. I hate the left-hand turn lights. Drives me crazy. Looking at you, Aperture. Got app integration. Their app is simple, easy to use. Unfortunately, we're still in early stages and the app does not have control of the effects. The effects can be controlled from the back, which, again, they don't really intend for you to use it from the back, so there is no DMX control as some larger lights would have. One great feature, which is also a negative, you have that AC straight into the box here, which very much simplifies your setup. However, that means you're not going to be powering this off of any sort of elaborate battery system, like you can with some Aperture lights with their dual V-mount or gold mount battery caddy. You can plug in a wired controller, snake that down the pole, and then control it more easily from there. And for the edge of feature set, we're going to go through all the effects in the app. If you want to skip over that, there's a time code there that you can jump over, but we'll want to walk through these effects and see how they look. As you can see in these effects, they are kind of middle of the road with regards to versatility. Some manufacturers don't let you adjust the white balance of the effects. I find that incredibly annoying. Generally, you want the fire to be a warmer tone, you want the lightning to be a cooler tone, but sometimes you want to change things up a little bit. And this allows you to do that. It gives you control of speed and white balance and intensity, so that's great. But we don't have the most effects and the most versatile effects which you would get from the Sidious Link app within the Aperture Amaran ecosystem. So for feature set, it has pretty much all the standard features and a couple of features that other lights don't have, just with its general portability and ease of use. It's going to be a 9 out of 10 for feature set. Take a breather here. This video is brought to you by me and my merch store, where we have our new Go Take Some Photos mugs. This is the medium size, which is larger than I expected it to be. This holds a lot of coffee, or, you know, whatever you want to put in here. So, if you want to rep your willingness to go take some photos, you can order some in the link in the description below, or one of these t-shirts. Alright, let's get back into it. Usability, and here's where things get complicated. Number one, a lot of power in a tiny space. These fans have got to kick up some muss. If you're using this at 100% output, this is going to be coming in at 49 decibels at 3 feet, which is clearly audible. If you're recording sound and video, this really can't be in the same room with you at 100% output. Now, when you go down to like between half and 75%, it does not make a lot of sound. Around there, you're looking at up to 42 decibels, which is significantly quieter perceptually. And if you're at 50% or below, you won't really even hear from the fans. It'll be up to 34 decibels. I can't check sound much lower than that just because of the ambient sounds in my studio. The power curve is not a curve at all. It is a just arrow straight line going right up there. Extremely linear power output. For usability for me, again, I touched on this before, the screen is extremely small. Not only is it small, it's in a position that once it's up on a light stand, it is blocked by the protrusion of the power supply fan, so you're just not going to see that screen. And we don't have any buttons here outside of the knobs, so we have our quick sets up, down, and rotate, but if you want to get into changing modes and stuff, you have to press and hold, and which button do you press and hold? You gotta learn that, and it's hard to get used to. I would love to have a menu button or a wireless control button. The irony is that when you buy the remote controller that plugs into this, there is a menu button on it. There are other controls on it that are not on the light housing itself, and that's frustrating to me. Having a Bowens mount, nice and easy. Also, it has a nice smooth action to it. Some Bowens mounts are tighter and harder to use. One oddity for me is that I find having the Bowens release right next to this screw, if I'm reaching up to try to release my light, I can't remember which side it's on. I'm like, is this the switch? Is this the switch? Oh, there's the switch. There are too many things that feel exactly like the Bowens release switch on this light. And I use a lot of light, so I can't remember exactly where the release is, so a lot of the time I just grab it, find the thing that moves, and I move it. And this one confuses me. Speaking of features, let's talk about that huge amount of power. When you get up to close to 500 watts of LED power, you're getting to the point where you can really get stuff done in daylight. And not just adding light, but overpowering light. So if you use the stock reflector on this, and you're in the shade, according to my experience, you can create a day for night scenario, so you can overpower the ambient daylight coming in around you, and again, as long as you can control the light somewhat. So you shoot this on a warmer tone, but then adjust your camera cooler so that looks closer to normal. The surrounding area has a cooler tone, which gives like a night vibe, and it brings down the overall exposure level of it, which gives you a lovely look and allows you to shoot scenes without having to wait for the sun to necessarily go all the way down and so forth, as you can see in these videos. So basically, the usability of this comes down to this being very simple, very small, and lighter than anything else that produces this much power for packability, but at upper power levels, it is unusably loud for some work. So for usability, I'm gonna give this a 7.5 out of 10. Light quality, let's have a look at our spectrums. Here's what the spectrum looks like at 2700K, and then again at 5600K, and if you're interested at 6500K. One interesting note, I usually measure these spectrums at 3 feet away. I had to get to about 4 feet away because of the amount of heat this LED is kicking off. At 3 feet away, my measurements were contaminated. At less than 3 feet away, I was getting just a lot of infrared interference, which is heat clouding up the red spectrum and just messing up the measurements. This thing kicks out a lot of heat, which, I mean, you would expect from a light with this much power. And so what do we get for light quality? As you can see here, our CRI at 5600K is 96.8 as measured, which is slightly higher than what they have it listed at, but is not a super high CRI. If we move on over to the R9 values, it's 97, which is quite high. It's not the very highest, but it is very close to being the very highest. And if we slide a little further over to our Kelvin shift measurement, if we get as close to 5600K as possible, and then we go from 100 down to 10%, our Kelvin only shifted by 49, which is very small, negligible. And CCT accuracy, finally, if we dial this in at 5600K, we're actually getting 5480, which is off by 120. And as you see, the 2700K is closer, and the 6500K is off by quite a bit. It doesn't actually get cool enough to be 6500K, only goes to 6276, which overall gives us a light quality score of 8.9, not the highest, but not bad at all either. And I would say it was good enough to take photos with. So here's our situation. We want to take photos of bodybuilders or people entering fitness competitions. The problem with using flash for this is it's very important to have the light falling in a very specific way. So I have the posing expert and posing trainer standing next to me. And in past shoots, we're like guessing back and forth to take a picture, show it to her. But if we use continuous light, all of a sudden, she can see exactly how the light is falling on them, so it takes the guesswork out of the whole situation, which is fantastic. And my lighting setup for fitness photography is pretty complicated. We have our key light, which is also the body light, which is a harder light that's casting a sharp shadow down their body. That was this light at 100% output. Now, I could have just used like a stock reflector or a Fresnel, and then I wouldn't have had to have quite as much power, but I wanted to push this to its limit, so I'm using a double diffuse softbox with a grid from way above their head, cutting straight down to make those harsh shadows. But then I have a secondary light that is more on face level, again gridded, not nearly as bright, shooting straight at their face to cut out the harsh shadows just on their face. And then we have a side light, which is another 200 watt LED light that is creating a rim light on one side, and then I have another hard light on the other side. I was going to use a strip box, but the space ended up being smaller than I expected, so I had to just use a stock reflector, which just again created another hard light on the other side. We have a 4-light setup to create this fitness setup, but it was fantastic because, again, the trainer could see exactly where the light was going, and so they could say this, that, up, down, and it was much faster, and oh boy, did we take a lot of pictures. Ended up delivering over 600 pictures from that shoot. And so having this as our key light, the light quality with that R9 of 97 was clearly good enough. And finally, we're moving on to value. And Zhiyun in the past has done pretty well for value, but they try to be innovative so they don't have to like totally undercut everybody because they're giving you things that other people can't. And again, what they're giving you is this tiny light that's 6.17 pounds with no other components required. Every other light that this competes with requires additional components, a massive power supply. Some of them, their power supply is bigger than the light, which has its ups and downs. Again, that can make it quieter, but it also makes it more complicated, heavier, harder to set up, and more room in your bag. Let's do this. $720 for the B500. Strongest competition for this would be the Nanlite FC500B. Pretty popular light, $700, 500 watts of light as well. But that light, the light itself is 6.97 pounds, heavier, slightly, plus a 4.9 pound power supply dangling. So overall, nearly twice the weight. Also have the Nanlite Forza 500B Mark II is $1,500, and the light head itself without the power supply is 9.5 pounds. Small rig 450B, also 500 watt light, $1,150, although it's often on sale for $850 or $800. 7.3 pounds, again, with a power supply additionally on top of that. GVM SD500B Pro is $800. 11 pounds for the light. That light is built like a tank. It's all this giant metal chassis. Plus, there is also an additional power supply of 5.7 pounds. There's the Godox NOLED M600 Bi, more power, $1,600, 730 watts. 10.9 pounds plus the power supply. Photodiox Pro Warrior 600X, what a ridiculous name. 600 watts, 12.5 pounds plus power supply. Aperture, the ubiquitous LS600X, $1,990, 11.4 pounds plus a 10.8 pound power supply. What is that, 3.5 times the weight of this? But that one I do believe is weather resistant, so you are getting something for that. Although for almost 3 times the price, that's becoming a bit of a tough sell depending on your use case. For bang for your buck, you can get 500 watts of power for a tiny bit less, but at the same time, you are getting something that can't really compare that easily just because of the form factor. I'm gonna give this a 9.5 out of 10 for value. And we add that all up, that gives us an 85.8% for our total score, which is a solid score, not the top of the market, because obviously Zhiyun had to make a couple compromises to create this ridiculous amount of power in this small of a package. If you want to pick one of these up, there's going to be a link down in the description below to help support this channel. I don't even know if it's an affiliate link. And feed my fat cats who are sleeping through this whole video. Because, you know, they're not bodybuilders. Well, Veronica really is building on her body, but I digress. Do you have any questions about the Zhiyun 500 watt B500 video light? Let me know down in the comments below. I will get back to you. Until next time, let's go take some very interesting photos and videos.